On a distant planet, far beyond the bright stars humans could see, a civilization lived quietly, almost forgotten in the vast emptiness of space. Their cities were delicate and luminous, built on the edges of cliffs and floating islands glowing softly like scattered fireflies. Life had once been peaceful here, with families living in harmony, tending gardens that shimmered with strange colors, and children playing beneath the twin moons. But that peace had started to crumble. For many cycles of their sun, the planet had suffered. The air had become thinner, storms more violent, and strange sicknesses were spreading among the population. The alien doctors had tried everything they knew, mixing potions, running diagnostics, and even tapping into old knowledge passed down for generations. Nothing worked. One by one, those who fell ill disappeared quietly, leaving behind hollow spaces in the homes and empty echoes in the streets. Among the aliens, there was growing fear. Their leaders gathered in the high towers, discussing what could be done. Some believed it was a punishment from the universe. Some thought it was the planet itself revolting against them. But one truth became clear. Without help, their world would not survive for long, and time was slipping away faster than they could understand. In a hidden chamber beneath the largest city, a group of the wisest and oldest aliens worked tirelessly. They had spent decades studying the stars, hoping to one day reach out to others like them. Now desperation drove them to act. Using a complex network of energy waves and encoded signals, they sent a message into the vast blackness of space. It was unlike anything they had ever tried before. The message carried not only words but a resonance, a pulse of their very emotions, crying out for help. The message traveled for countless light years, drifting past cold planets, glowing suns, and clusters of asteroids. The aliens did not know who might find it, or if anyone would hear their plea. They had only hope, fragile and trembling, that anyone would respond. They had no idea that in the infinite universe even a small ripple could attract attention, and not all attention would be kind. On their planet, life continued, but uneasily. The skies were darker than before, and the winds carried a strange metallic scent that made many feel weak and dizzy. The young ones could no longer play freely. Their laughter had become rare, like an echo from another time. Families clung to each other, whispering prayers to whatever forces might be listening. Nights were the hardest when the twin moons lit up the scars on the planet's surface, revealing the deep cracks in the cities and the sick lying in their homes. Despite the growing despair, there were moments of hope. Small gardens still bloomed, though fewer than before. Teachers continued to educate the children, speaking softly of stories and history, keeping the memory of better days alive. Artists painted murals of what life used to be, imagining skies full of color, rivers that never dried, and mountains that sang when the wind blew. In these small ways, the aliens clung to life, refusing to surrender entirely to despair. The leaders, however, were not blind to the urgency. Each day, more citizens fell ill, more buildings were abandoned, and more of the planet's beauty faded. They held long councils, debating every possible way to survive. One elder, who had seen countless cycles, spoke with quiet conviction. "We have reached the point where waiting will destroy us. If no one comes, we must reach beyond our world. We must send a signal that cannot be ignored." The plan was simple in its purpose, but complex in execution. They would create a signal so strong, so deeply resonant with their desperation, that it would carry not just their words, but their very essence. Anyone who received it would feel their fear, their hope, and their need for help. Days turned into nights as the scientists and engineers worked tirelessly. They synchronized energy fields, calibrated frequencies, and encoded messages in patterns so intricate that only an advanced civilization could decode them. When the signal was finally ready, the leaders gathered once more. Standing together in the chamber, they activated the transmission. A deep hum filled the room, vibrating through every stone and crystal. The signal shot upward, piercing the atmosphere, leaping past the clouds and escaping into the endless void of space. Every alien present felt it, a strange mixture of relief and terror. Relief because they had done all they could. Terror because, beyond their understanding, they had no idea who or what might respond. For the first few moments, there was only silence. Then across the planet, monitors and sensors began to pick up echoes, faint responses that were unlike anything recorded before. Some signals returned in patterns that suggested awareness, but the aliens could not tell if they were friendly or hostile. Fear returned immediately. They had hoped for aid, but in the universe aid did not always come wrapped in kindness. Life on the planet became tense. Citizens watched the skies wondering if shapes or lights would appear. Rumors spread. Some said the signal might bring saviors. Others whispered that it might bring destroyers. The uncertainty gnawed at everyone. Children asked questions that the elders could not answer. "Will they come?" they would ask, staring at the distant stars. "Will they save us?" And the elders, though worried themselves, smiled faintly and said, perhaps someone is listening." Even as the waiting continued, the sickness and the storms persisted. Some families fled to less damaged areas while others stayed behind, tending the sick and guarding what little they had left. The planet itself seemed to hold its breath as if aware of the impending encounter. There was a quiet tension in the air, a sense that everything was about to change. Days passed, and the aliens began to notice subtle changes in the energy around their world. Slight disturbances, faint signals repeating in patterns that mirrored their own, suggested that someone had indeed received their message. Hearts lifted cautiously even as fear remained. Hope and fear twisted together like threads, inseparable and constant. Among the people, there was one small family who embodied the planet's collective anxiety. They had watched the illness take neighbors, friends, and family members. They had seen the vibrant gardens wither, yet they refused to give up. Every night they would sit outside their home, gazing at the stars, wondering who might answer their plea. The youngest, a curious child with shimmering skin like polished silver, asked questions that the parents could barely answer. "Will they come quickly?" the child asked. "Or are we alone?" The parents would squeeze each other's hands and respond with what courage they could muster. "We are not alone," they said, though neither fully believed it. And in that uncertainty, there was a strange kind of courage. The courage to hope, even when the end seemed near. And then, one quiet cycle, far beyond the planet, something began to move. Small distant shapes that humans would call ships began traveling toward the source of the signal. The aliens did not yet know who or what they were, only that something had responded. Excitement mixed with fear. Finally, after so long, the silence of the universe was broken. The aliens did not know it, but the beings answering their plea were unlike any they had imagined. These were humans, but not the ones most would think of. These humans were hardy, aggressive, and adapted to survive the deadliest worlds. They were called Deathworlders, a name the aliens could not understand yet. But their arrival would change everything. For now, though the aliens only saw lights in the distance, moving steadily toward their home. Their hearts filled with cautious hope. They had sent their cry into the void, and someone was coming. The night was quiet, the twin moons reflecting softly on the trembling cities. For the first time in many cycles, the aliens allowed themselves to dream that maybe, just maybe, their world would not end alone. Far away in a part of the galaxy not yet mapped by most civilizations, humans aboard a monitoring station picked up an unusual signal. At first it was faint, almost drowned in the noise of distant stars, but there was something different about it. The pulse carried patterns unlike anything they had ever encountered. It was deliberate, structured, and somehow emotional. The humans at the station were curious. They had received signals before, but this one was unique. It wasn't just information. It carried a sense of urgency, a kind of desperation. The scientists, engineers, and observers gathered around their screens, eyes widening as the patterns repeated. "It's a distress call," one said quietly, almost in disbelief. "Someone is asking for help." A council formed quickly. Not the political kind, but a group of decision-makers aboard the station. They debated what to do. Some argued that it was too risky. Responding could attract attention from hostile forces, or worse, lead them into a trap. Others said that ignoring the call would be cruel. "If someone is in real danger, don't we have an obligation to respond?" One voice argued. The room fell silent for a moment, everyone aware that the choice they made could change the course of events in ways they could not yet imagine. Finally, after hours of deliberation, they decided to respond. A small exploratory fleet would be dispatched, capable of traveling at incredible speeds and gathering information. Its mission was simple: locate the source of the signal, assess the situation, and provide aid if possible. They had no idea what they would encounter, but the hope of helping outweighed their fear. Meanwhile, on the alien planet, Life continued under a tense sky. The inhabitants had noticed subtle changes, signs that something was moving toward them. Strange lights flickered faintly in the distance, moving steadily closer. The aliens gathered in their cities, observing with awe and growing hope. They did not yet know the nature of what was coming, whether it would bring salvation or destruction, but they could feel that the universe was responding. Back on the human station, preparations for the journey were intense. Engineers ran countless simulations, ensuring the fleet could survive unknown hazards. Scientists worked to decode more information from the signal, trying to understand the aliens' language and technology. They were careful, knowing that misreading even a small detail could lead to disaster. Communication protocols were established, with translations programmed to adapt to unknown languages. Every precaution was taken to ensure the mission would not fail, but unknown to the humans, their decision had consequences they could not foresee. The signal from the aliens, broadcast with raw emotion and desperation, had traveled far beyond the intended target. It had not only reached the station of the humans who would respond, but also sent echoes across the galaxy, to places where survival had hardened beings in ways most could not imagine. The fleet set out, moving with purpose toward the source of the distress call. Inside the ships, the crew watched the readings, monitoring every change in energy, gravity, and communication waves. Their excitement was mixed with tension. Some spoke in hushed tones about what they might encounter: intelligent life forms, collapsing civilizations, dangerous environments. Others focused silently on their tasks, knowing that any mistake could be catastrophic. On the alien world, the first signs of arrival appeared in the sky. Strange shapes, moving faster than any natural phenomenon, glided silently toward the cities. The aliens could not identify them at first. Some speculated that these were beings of light, perhaps sent by the universe itself. Others feared they might be dangerous predators, attracted by the signal in ways they did not understand. Families gathered in their homes, watching the skies with a mixture of awe and terror. As the fleet approached, the humans began scanning the planet with sensors. They detected life forms, intelligent structures, and signs of disease or environmental stress. Reports came back to the fleet commander, a calm and disciplined individual with years of experience navigating unknown territories. "This world is fragile," the commander said. "We need to proceed carefully. Any sudden movement or aggressive act could provoke them. We are guests here, not conquerors." The aliens, unaware of the humans' intentions, prepared themselves. They had learned caution in recent cycles. Their scientists had constructed small defensive devices, not to harm visitors but to protect their cities if the newcomers were hostile. Families taught their young ones to stay inside shelters and avoid open areas until the visitors made contact. Fear was everywhere, but so was hope. The possibility that someone would truly help kept them awake at night, watching the skies. The first contact attempt came from the humans. A probe was sent down, hovering just above the planet's surface. It emitted lights and sounds meant to communicate peace. The aliens observed, hesitant at first, then slowly approached. A team of scientists used long-range sensors to study the probe, curious and cautious. They could feel the intent behind the signals. These beings meant no immediate harm, but caution remained. Miscommunication could be fatal. Despite the careful approach, small misunderstandings began to occur. The aliens had never seen such technology and interpreted its movements in ways that made them nervous. Some families retreated deeper into their homes, while others watched from rooftops. Meanwhile, the humans analyzed every response, trying to interpret the aliens' reactions accurately. Misreading even a small gesture could escalate the situation. As hours passed, the humans and aliens attempted rudimentary communication. Light pulses, symbols, and carefully timed signals exchanged messages across the distance. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The humans realized that the aliens were intelligent, emotional, and in need of assistance. The aliens, for their part, sensed the intent behind the newcomers' approach and began to feel something they had not felt in cycles: cautious trust. But far beyond, hidden observers were also moving. The Deathworlders, humans adapted to the deadliest conditions in the galaxy, had detected the same signal. Unlike the explorers, these humans did not approach with caution or empathy. Their instincts drove them to see opportunity, survival, and dominance in every new encounter. They traveled with speed, purpose, and a terrifying presence that the aliens could not yet imagine. Back on the station, The fleet commander began sensing anomalies in the readings, patterns in the signal that did not match the expected responses. "There's something else," the commander said. "Something moving faster than our fleet and following the same path." The crew exchanged worried glances. No one knew who these other travelers were, only that their arrival could complicate everything. On the alien planet, the citizens noticed changes in the sky. Shadows moved differently. Distant lights appeared and vanished too quickly to be natural. Some whispered that the universe had sent both saviors and threats at the same time. Families clutched each other, unsure whether to pray, hide, or prepare for battle. The twin moons reflected the tension, casting pale light over trembling cities. Despite the growing tension, the aliens continued their cautious hope. They sent out small emissaries, hoping to meet the newcomers halfway. The humans, in turn, prepared landing teams and communication devices designed to adapt to whatever language or signals the aliens used. Both sides understood the risks, but curiosity and the desire to help or understand drove them forward. And then the first ships of the fleet arrived in orbit. From the planet below, the aliens could see them as glowing forms, casting strange reflections on the clouds. Fear mixed with awe. For the first time, they understood that their cry for help had not gone unheard. But still, the future was uncertain. Were these beings truly here to help, or was danger now arriving in a form they could not yet comprehend? The humans prepared carefully, choosing their first contact points, planning gestures of peace, and ensuring their equipment could withstand unexpected hazards. They understood that the fate of an entire civilization rested on these first moments of interaction. Missteps could mean disaster. On the planet's surface, the aliens held their breath. Families stayed close, elders whispered prayers, and the young ones watched with wide, curious eyes. The lights in the sky were no longer distant. They were coming closer, slow but steady, carrying the promise of help and the threat of the unknown. The night stretched long, filled with tension and hope. The aliens had reached the point where waiting was almost unbearable. Every passing hour brought them closer to salvation or danger. And far beyond the atmosphere, in orbit and beyond, unseen watchers moved closer, their intentions unknown, their presence both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The universe, it seemed, had answered their plea. But in ways no one could yet understand, the arrival of outsiders would test everything the aliens believed about trust, survival, and the cost of asking for help. The aliens watched the sky with growing unease. At first, the lights in the distance had seemed almost magical, like a promise from the stars. But now shapes were forming, moving with purpose, and they were unlike anything the aliens had ever seen. Their initial hope began to twist into fear, though none could put it into words. Something was approaching, something powerful, and it was not the friendly explorers they had imagined. From orbit, the first ships of the Deathworlders appeared. Unlike the delicate human explorers, these ships were large, rugged, and imposing, designed to survive the harshest conditions. Their surfaces were armored and dark, reflecting no light. The aliens had never seen technology like this. Even from afar, the presence of these ships felt threatening. It was as if the universe had sent predators instead of helpers. The first sight of the Deathworlders on the planet's surface caused panic. Families ran to shelters, children clinging to parents, elders trembling as they whispered prayers. The cities that had seemed fragile under environmental stress now appeared even more vulnerable. The aliens had hoped for guidance, for assistance. Instead, they felt the crushing weight of a presence they could not control. The Deathworlders moved methodically. Their ships descended, landing with precision, stirring clouds of dust and debris. The aliens tried to observe from a distance, hiding behind buildings, behind walls, even behind trees that had survived storms and disease. But the humans' arrival was impossible to ignore. Every step they took, every movement of their ships radiated strength and a kind of harsh confidence. Inside the ships, the Deathworlders were not thinking about negotiation or diplomacy. Their instincts were survival and dominance. They had traveled across impossible distances, surviving worlds that would kill ordinary humans. On each mission, they adapted to conditions, learned from threats, and overcame obstacles that would have ended other civilizations. On this planet, they sensed vulnerability, resources, and opportunity, though they could not yet understand the aliens' emotional depth. The aliens tried to communicate, sending out pulses and signals in the language they had used for the previous explorers. They hoped the humans would respond, that someone would finally offer help. But the Deathworlders interpreted the signals differently. Their experience had taught them that unknown signals often meant threats or opportunities to gain an advantage. They were cautious in a way the aliens could not understand, aggressive yet disciplined, ready to act at the first sign of danger. Small groups of aliens moved closer to try to assess the newcomers. They carried lights and symbols meant to indicate peace, but even these simple gestures were misunderstood. The Deathworlders, trained to anticipate attacks, assumed the lights were a form of warning or camouflage. Skirmishes broke out unintentionally. Energy burst from defensive devices fired into the air, startling both sides. Buildings shook as the first accidental collisions occurred. Fear escalated quickly. Families and citizens scattered in every direction. Some hid in underground tunnels that had been used for centuries during storms and disasters. Others climbed to higher points in the city, hoping that from there they could watch and understand what was happening. The young ones cried, asking why help had turned into terror. The elders tried to comfort them, though even they did not fully understand how to survive what was coming. The Deathworlders were relentless but not cruel. They did not intentionally harm the aliens at first. Their actions were dictated by instincts developed over generations of surviving deadly worlds. They moved to secure areas, study the environment, and control potential threats. But to the fragile aliens, each step seemed aggressive, overwhelming, and unstoppable. Their hope for salvation turned into confusion and fear, and they began to realize that they had not only been heard, they had been noticed by the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. One young alien, curious and brave despite the chaos, observed the humans closely. Their size, their strength, and the way they moved fascinated the child. Unlike the fragile explorers from distant worlds, these humans seemed indestructible. They could climb rocky cliffs, withstand heavy storms, and adapt instantly to changing conditions. The child wondered if there could ever be understanding between their species, or if these humans were simply unstoppable forces of nature. Meanwhile, the leaders of the alien cities tried to regain control. They sent signals to coordinate defensive measures, trying to protect key areas and gather the civilians. But the Deathworlders' presence was already changing the planet. The ground shook from the weight of their ships. Dust and debris filled the air. Even simple movements caused minor tremors that damaged fragile buildings. The aliens realized, painfully, that survival required more than hope. It required strategy, quick thinking, and courage. As the first hours passed, attempts at peaceful communication continued. Some Deathworlders paused, studying the alien responses, trying to decode meaning. Others acted instinctively, securing areas and testing limits. Misunderstandings multiplied. What the aliens meant as a warning could be interpreted as defiance. What the humans meant as caution could be seen as aggression. Every interaction was tense, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous. Families watched from hiding places as the chaos unfolded. Parents whispered instructions to children: "Do not come out, do not speak, do not make a sound." Elders recorded observations, noting every movement, every reaction, hoping to learn enough to survive. Even in terror, there was determination. The aliens were not ready to give up. They had fought storms, illness, and disaster before. They would find a way to endure this too. In one city, a group of scientists attempted to approach the humans with symbols of peace. They raised glowing banners projecting messages of assistance and hope. For a brief moment, a Deathworlder paused. Something in the alien signals seemed familiar. Perhaps it was the desperation, the raw emotion encoded in the pulse. It was unlike any challenge they had faced, more nuanced than a collapsing ecosystem or a dangerous predator. There was intelligence here, and it mattered. But the brief pause did not last. The instincts of survival and dominance returned. Even the most curious Deathworlders could not ignore potential threats. They moved forward with caution, every gesture measured. To the aliens, this seemed like indecision or hostility. To the humans, it was a necessary part of survival. Every interaction was a delicate dance, one misstep away from disaster. Amid the chaos, small acts of courage shone through. A young alien guided frightened families through collapsed streets, leading them to safe shelters. Scientists worked tirelessly to stabilize damaged areas, even while fear surged around them. And somewhere in the shadows, a human observed the aliens' resilience with curiosity, realizing that these beings, though fragile, had a kind of intelligence and determination worth understanding. The skies, once filled with hope, now carried tension. The twin moons reflected shadows of ships and alien structures, illuminating both fear and bravery. Dust swirled in every corner, making vision difficult, but the aliens learned quickly to adapt using rooftops, hidden tunnels, and natural formations for cover. They had survived disasters before. Now, survival meant navigating beings far stronger and faster than they could imagine. By the end of the first cycle of the Deathworlders' presence, both sides had begun to understand the stakes. The aliens realized that not all who answered their plea would come as saviors. The humans, meanwhile, understood that this planet contained life forms capable of emotion, culture, and intelligence, something rare and worth observing carefully. And both sides, though cautious, began to sense the possibility of negotiation, the faint hope that understanding might still be possible. Yet the fear lingered. The aliens had sent a cry for help, and it had been answered in ways they had never anticipated. Their hope had transformed into a complicated mixture of awe, fear, and cautious curiosity. Survival would depend not just on the strength of their cities or their technology, but on their ability to communicate, adapt, and endure under pressure. The night came slowly, heavy with uncertainty. Families huddled together, watching the stars, listening to the hum of engines and the occasional distant crash from ships above. The young ones slept fitfully, dreams haunted by shadows that moved too fast, lights that shone too bright, and the faces of beings that seemed unstoppable. The elders whispered stories of past survival, of storms and plagues that had been overcome. "We endure," they said. "We survive." For the aliens, the arrival of the Deathworlders had changed everything. The universe had answered their call, but the answer was not the comforting presence they had imagined. Instead, it was a test, a challenge they could not ignore. Their world would not only survive through hope, but through courage, ingenuity, and understanding of forces far beyond their experience. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the planet and its twin moons, the first human explorers continued to approach. Unlike the Deathworlders, they moved with gentleness, curiosity, and careful intent. The aliens had yet to see them, but they represented the faintest glimmer of hope, proof that not every response to their plea would bring fear and destruction. The first hours of contact had passed, and the aliens were exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Their cities had survived, but barely. Dust and debris still filled the air from the landing of the Deathworlders' ships, and the fragile streets were cracked from the vibrations of enormous machinery. Families huddled in hidden corners, whispering and praying, while the elders tried to organize what little defense they could muster. For the first time in many cycles, the aliens realized that survival would not come from the planet itself, or from luck, but from courage, quick thinking, and the ability to navigate an entirely new and dangerous reality. The Deathworlders had begun moving through the cities in small groups, carefully but aggressively. Their instincts told them to secure the area and ensure nothing could threaten them. They were survivors from the deadliest planets, trained for harsh environments and conditioned to act decisively in any situation. To the aliens, their presence was overwhelming, their strength unimaginable. A single step from one of these humans could knock over a wall that had stood for centuries. Their eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned everything, reading movement, anticipating danger, and preparing for confrontation, even if none had yet occurred. Communication had begun, but it was fragile and confusing. The aliens sent light pulses and harmonic vibrations, symbols designed to show peace and a desire for understanding. They tried to explain, through shapes and patterns, that they were in need of help, not confrontation. Some of the humans paused when they noticed the signals. Their trained instincts sensed intelligence, a culture behind the fragile forms of life. But their approach was cautious, too cautious perhaps for the aliens to understand. Every hesitation was read as indecision, every careful move interpreted as potential deception. Small misunderstandings quickly escalated. One alien scientist trying to send a more complex message accidentally triggered a small energy burst near the humans. The Deathworlders immediately reacted, raising protective shields and forming defensive stances. The aliens interpreted this as aggression, and panic rippled through the city. Children cried, parents shouted, and elders urged calm. It was chaos born of fear and misunderstanding, a conflict neither side truly intended but both could not yet avoid. The aliens tried again, sending more signals, carefully repeating patterns they hoped would be understood as peaceful. They lit large beacons on the rooftops and activated harmonic amplifiers that carried their messages across several kilometers. They risked exposure, leaving themselves visible in the open to show trust. The Deathworlders paused to study the new signals, curious despite themselves. One of them, older than most and with experience in delicate encounters, motioned for caution. He had survived on planets where misunderstanding meant death, and he understood that patience could save lives. Meanwhile, families in the streets observed the humans closely. They saw creatures taller, stronger, and faster than anything they had imagined. Their movements were precise and controlled, yet unpredictable. Each step could crush fragile structures or alter the environment permanently. Children trembled, clinging to parents, while elders whispered stories of survival and courage. "We have faced storms, sickness, and disaster," they said. "We have endured. We will endure this too." Even as fear gripped their hearts, the alien people refused to surrender entirely. Conflict, however, was inevitable. Small skirmishes broke out in the streets. Defensive devices fired, not to kill but to warn, and the humans responded instinctively, blocking or redirecting the energy with unmatched reflexes. To the aliens, it seemed as though the humans were attacking, even when they were merely protecting themselves. Panic spread. Buildings that had been weakened by storms and time began to crumble under the stress, further terrifying the citizens. Amid the chaos, moments of bravery appeared. A young alien stepped into the open, waving a glowing staff in a pattern meant to signal surrender and peace. He moved slowly, carefully, and the humans watched. For the first time, they paused in their forward momentum, sensing that intelligence and emotion were present. The pause did not resolve the tension entirely, but it allowed the aliens to regain some hope. Some of the humans began to attempt communication. They projected patterns and symbols back toward the aliens, using technology that could mimic light pulses and vibrations. Slowly, the two species started a fragile dance, an exchange of signals, each trying to interpret the other's intentions. Missteps were frequent. A wrong pulse could suggest aggression. A slight hesitation could suggest fear or trickery. Still, the effort continued, driven by curiosity and the necessity to survive. In the midst of the disorder, families worked to protect their own. Parents guided children to shelters, elders helped the wounded, and scientists calculated ways to stabilize the damaged city. Even as panic surged around them, courage and ingenuity persisted. The aliens were determined to survive, and they began to realize that understanding these strange humans would be as important as protecting their own lives. The Deathworlders, on the other hand, began observing patterns in alien behavior. They recognized intelligence, cultural structures, and emotional responses. One of the older humans, experienced in handling delicate encounters, noted the aliens' careful coordination and subtle communication. "These beings are not just fragile, they are clever," he said. "We must proceed carefully, or we risk destroying what could be a valuable civilization." At night, the twin moons reflected off broken streets and damaged buildings. Families remained hidden, watching the humans move through their cities, analyzing every step. The air was thick with dust, tension, and uncertainty. The younger generation, curious despite fear, peeked from hiding places, their wide eyes fixed on the enormous beings. Some wondered if help had arrived at last, while others feared the very presence of these newcomers. Efforts to establish trust continued. Alien scientists prepared small gifts, technological tools meant to show understanding and goodwill. These were simple, fragile devices designed to communicate without harm. Humans noticed the intent behind these gifts, a rare gesture of diplomacy in a universe often ruled by violence. Yet the potential for misunderstanding remained high. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture could ignite panic again. As the hours passed, a strange rhythm began to emerge. Both sides adapted to each other's presence. The aliens learned where it was safe to move, where to hide, and how to signal intentions clearly. The humans began to understand subtle cues in the aliens' communication, patterns in light pulses, the timing of movements, and signs of emotion that suggested intelligence rather than threat. Slowly, a fragile understanding took shape. Despite progress, fear lingered. Every unexpected sound, every shadow reminded the aliens that the Deathworlders were far stronger, far faster, and far less predictable than themselves. Yet even in the tension, moments of hope emerged. A small group of humans began working alongside alien scientists, cautiously observing, asking questions through signals, and attempting to create a common language. These small efforts, tentative as they were, brought glimmers of relief to the aliens. Families who had hidden for hours began to cautiously emerge, still wary, still alert. Children asked questions they could not yet understand. Will they help us? Are they dangerous? Elders answered as best they could, combining hope with realism. We do not know everything, they said, but we must learn, and we must survive. The night stretched on, tense and quiet, broken only by occasional tremors from the humans' equipment and the occasional small energy discharge from alien defenses. It was a night of observation, learning, and cautious adaptation. Both species had survived the first real encounters without catastrophe, but everyone knew that the next day would demand more. Misunderstandings could still spiral into conflict, but understanding might also grow into cooperation. By the end of this cycle, both aliens and humans had learned critical lessons. The aliens realized that not every being who responded to their plea would come in peace. The humans understood that these fragile creatures were intelligent, resourceful, and capable of survival in ways that required respect. Both sides began to sense that survival might not only depend on strength but on the ability to adapt, communicate, and trust. Even in the most uncertain circumstances, the planet remained battered, fragile, and tense. Families returned to hidden shelters. Children huddled close to parents, and the elders whispered words of courage and hope. The sky, heavy with the twin moons, reflected shadows of both alien structures and human machines. The world had changed, and nothing would ever be the same. And in the quiet moments between the chaos, a faint hope emerged. The aliens realized that even in fear, even amidst misunderstanding and danger, the possibility of cooperation existed. They had survived storms, plagues, and disaster before. Now survival meant navigating beings far stronger than themselves. But survival also meant learning, adapting, and perhaps finding allies in the most unexpected forms. The night after the first clashes, the aliens began to gather themselves. Their cities were damaged but still standing, and families, though exhausted, were determined to survive. The elders called meetings with scientists, leaders, and volunteers, discussing ways to protect their people while also understanding the newcomers. Fear had not vanished, but determination had begun to grow. They realized that these beings, the Deathworlders, could not be ignored. They had to learn to live alongside them, at least long enough to survive. Meanwhile, the Deathworlders had paused their aggressive movements. They had sensed intelligence and emotion in the aliens' responses. Some of their members had begun to wonder if these fragile creatures could be more than obstacles or curiosities. One among them, with years of experience on the deadliest planets, suggested observing the aliens carefully and learning their intentions before taking further action. This cautious approach was unusual for the Deathworlders, but it was necessary. They understood instinctively that misunderstanding could lead to disaster, something they had rarely faced. The first signs of cooperation appeared almost by accident. A small group of aliens had been working to stabilize a damaged energy field in their city. One of the Deathworlders approached, curious but cautious, observing their actions. The aliens, terrified at first, froze, unsure whether this new presence meant help or danger. Slowly, they realized the human was not attacking but watching carefully, trying to understand. Tentatively, the aliens continued their work, and the human began assisting in small ways, adjusting tools and machinery. It was awkward, tense, and imperfect, but it was cooperation. Families watched from hiding, astonished. Children peeked around corners, eyes wide, while elders whispered words of cautious hope. "They are helping," someone murmured. "It is not perfect, but it is help." The aliens began to understand that survival might require accepting assistance from those they had feared most. And the Deathworlders, though still wary, began to see that the aliens were intelligent, capable, and willing to communicate. As the first cycle passed, the aliens and humans established a fragile routine. The aliens would continue their work on repairing damaged areas, stabilizing energy fields, and protecting civilians, while the humans would assist where needed, providing strength and technology that the aliens could not manage alone. Communication remained limited, but small gestures, light patterns, signals, careful movements, created a shared understanding. Each side was learning to trust the other, though cautiously and imperfectly. In one district, a group of children played quietly while their parents worked nearby. At first, they were terrified of the humans, but slowly, they observed that these powerful beings were not harming them. One child, braver than the others, crept closer to watch a Deathworlder repairing a broken energy conduit. The human noticed the child, paused, and made a slow, careful gesture of reassurance. The child returned the gesture, a small but significant moment that symbolized the beginnings of understanding between the two species. The alien scientists worked tirelessly to communicate more effectively. They developed devices to amplify their signals, hoping to explain complex ideas about the planet's environment, the illnesses affecting their population, and their need for aid. The Deathworlders in turn began analyzing these signals, recognizing patterns and attempting to interpret meaning. Neither side fully understood the other yet, but progress was being made. Every successful communication, no matter how small, was a victory. Families began to emerge from hiding more often. Children cautiously approached humans, sometimes holding small objects meant as gestures of goodwill. Parents remained vigilant, watching every interaction carefully, but the overall sense of fear began to shift toward cautious hope. The aliens had survived storms, plagues, and disasters before. Now survival depended on learning, adapting, and accepting that help could come from the most unexpected sources. Despite the progress, challenges remained. The Deathworlders' instincts could never be entirely suppressed. They were still capable of sudden, overwhelming force, and one misstep could undo days of careful cooperation. The aliens were still fragile, their technology delicate, and one accident could escalate into a disaster. Everyone remained alert, aware that the fragile alliance they were building could collapse at any moment. In one area, a damaged water system threatened to flood nearby homes. Alien engineers worked to repair it, but the task was beyond their strength alone. A group of Deathworlders approached, offering assistance. At first, the aliens hesitated, fearing that the human strength could destroy more than it repaired. But carefully, side by side, they began working together. The humans lifted heavy debris while the aliens guided precise adjustments. Slowly, the water system stabilized, preventing disaster. It was a small victory, but it carried a profound significance. Cooperation worked, even between species that barely understood each other. Over time, small alliances formed in pockets across the city. Humans assisted with heavy labor, protective measures, and technical expertise, while aliens provided local knowledge, careful coordination, and cultural understanding. It was imperfect and tense, full of misunderstandings, but it worked. Families began to see that survival was possible if both sides learned to trust, even cautiously, and respected each other's limitations. The night skies reflected this new reality. The twin moons illuminated both alien structures and human machines. The city was damaged but alive. Families huddled together. Children slept with cautious hope. And the elders watched over everyone, knowing that the first fragile bonds of understanding had formed. For the first time since the arrival of the Deathworlders, the aliens could imagine a future where survival did not depend solely on their own strength. Despite progress, the Deathworlders remained unpredictable. One small misstep, a misinterpreted signal, or an accidental movement could cause panic. Yet over time, they began to recognize that the aliens were not weak or insignificant. These beings, fragile as they seemed, possessed intelligence, resourcefulness, and courage. The humans began to see that a partnership, however fragile, could yield benefits for both sides. In one district, an alien family was trapped in a partially collapsed building. The humans, noticing from a distance, moved carefully to assist. The aliens inside were terrified, unsure whether the humans would help or unintentionally destroy the structure. Slowly, with precise movements and clear signals, the humans stabilized the debris and helped the family out. It was a tense and careful rescue, but successful. Families watching nearby whispered in relief and awe. As the days passed, the pattern of cooperation strengthened. Small victories, repairing power systems, restoring communication networks, rescuing trapped citizens, built confidence. The aliens began to see the humans as potential allies rather than threats. The Deathworlders, in turn, continued to learn, realizing that patience and observation could achieve more than brute strength alone. Some children began playing together cautiously. They mimicked gestures they had seen between the aliens and the humans, learning the basics of communication. Parents watched closely, aware that each interaction carried risk, but also understanding that these moments helped build trust for the future. For the first time in many cycles, laughter, tentative, cautious, echoed faintly through the city. Leaders from both sides began to coordinate more deliberately. Aliens shared knowledge of the planet's ecosystems, the illnesses affecting their population, and the fragile structures that needed protection. Humans offered technical solutions, physical strength, and strategies for surviving hazards. Progress was slow, tense, and imperfect, but it was progress. Each successful interaction strengthened the fragile alliance. Each mistake reminded both sides to be cautious and patient. At night, families gathered in safe zones, sharing stories of courage and survival. Elders reminded the young of past disasters overcome, teaching lessons of resilience, adaptability, and hope. "We survive by learning," they said, "and by trusting when trust is possible." The children, exhausted but curious, absorbed these lessons, understanding that the world had changed and that their survival now depended on working together with the newcomers. By the end of this cycle, a fragile alliance had been formed. The aliens had learned that help could come from unexpected sources, and the Deathworlders had learned that patience, observation, and careful cooperation could achieve more than instinctive force. Both sides were still wary, still uncertain, and still capable of misunderstanding, but for the first time, they had proven that survival was possible together. The twin moons shone down on the city, reflecting shadows of both alien architecture and human machinery. Dust still lingered in the streets, and the damage would take cycles to repair. But life had returned. Families moved more freely, children played cautiously, and leaders from both sides continued to communicate, learning to trust one another in small, deliberate ways. Hope, fragile and cautious, had returned. The aliens had survived the first terrifying encounters, learned the power and unpredictability of the humans, and discovered that understanding, patience, and courage could create bonds even across species. The Deathworlders had observed, adapted, and begun to see value in cooperation rather than domination. Both sides had survived the first. The city had survived another cycle, but the damage was clear. Streets were cracked, buildings partially collapsed, and dust lingered everywhere. Families emerged from hiding, cautious but determined to rebuild. The aliens had learned hard lessons about fear, trust, and survival. They had also discovered something they had almost forgotten in the cycles of despair: hope. It was fragile, small, and cautious, but it existed. The Deathworlders, too, had changed. Their arrival had been terrifying, instinct-driven, and overwhelming, but over time they had begun to understand the aliens' intelligence, emotions, and culture. They realized that survival was not only about strength or dominance, but about learning, observing, and cooperating when the situation demanded it. Even for beings hardened by the deadliest worlds, these lessons were new and surprising. Work on the city continued. Alien engineers repaired energy systems, stabilized buildings, and restored communication networks. Humans lent strength, technology, and expertise. They lifted debris that had trapped families, reinforced fragile structures, and shared knowledge that the aliens had never imagined. The work was slow, tense, and sometimes dangerous, but it was also unifying. Citizens began to feel that survival was possible, even under the shadow of fear and uncertainty. Children who had hidden for so long began to explore cautiously. They followed their parents and elders, learning the rhythms of the repaired city. They watched the humans work, learning from their movements, gestures, and methods. Some mimicked simple actions, carrying small tools or helping lift debris. Though they were still afraid, they began to understand that not every giant being meant harm. Trust was being built slowly, brick by brick, gesture by gesture. Families shared meals in safe zones, talking quietly about the events of the past cycles. Elders told stories of the disasters they had endured, of storms, illness, and near collapse. "We have survived before," they said, "and we will survive now." Their voices were calm but firm, giving children courage. Hope was not blind optimism. It was a choice, a decision to believe that the universe had offered a second chance. Even the Deathworlders contributed to life in the city. They organized patrols to ensure safety, assisted in rebuilding infrastructure, and helped train some of the aliens in survival techniques that could prevent future accidents. While their methods were sometimes harsh and their movements overwhelming, The aliens gradually learned to coordinate with them. Each small success created a fragile rhythm, a pattern that allowed both species to coexist in the damaged city. The process of communication continued to improve. Alien scientists had refined their light pulses and harmonic signals, allowing more complex messages to be conveyed. Humans in turn developed devices to decode these signals with greater accuracy. Slowly, a shared understanding emerged. Both sides could exchange information, coordinate efforts, and even anticipate each other's needs. Trust was still fragile, but it existed. It was no longer just hope, it was cooperation. Families observed these changes with awe. Parents saw their children learning from humans, not with fear but with curiosity. Children mimicked gestures and signals, practicing communication that could one day allow them to work side by side with the newcomers. Elders watched cautiously, reminding everyone that the balance was delicate and that mistakes could still be dangerous. Every interaction carried weight, but every successful interaction built confidence. Over time, small communities began to form. Aliens and humans worked together in specific districts, rebuilding homes, repairing energy networks, and restoring basic life. Citizens discovered that cooperation could achieve more than isolation or fear. Humans taught techniques to reinforce fragile structures against storms, while aliens shared local knowledge about disease, resources, and energy patterns. Each partnership, though imperfect, grew stronger as both sides adapted to each other. Despite progress, challenges remained. The planet itself was still fragile. Storms and environmental hazards continued to test the people. Sickness still lingered among the alien population. Every day required careful observation, planning, and effort. Humans, with their experience on deadly worlds, helped anticipate dangers and plan strategies. Aliens, with their understanding of their home, guided humans to avoid mistakes that could destroy fragile habitats. Together, they began to protect life in ways neither could achieve alone. Families began to regain a sense of normalcy. Children played under the twin moons, though always within safe zones. Elders walked through repaired streets, observing progress and quietly teaching lessons about survival and resilience. Parents worked alongside humans, learning techniques that could help their communities withstand future disasters. Slowly, life began to feel sustainable, though the memory of the first terrifying encounters remained vivid. The most profound change, however, was in trust. The aliens had once feared every new arrival, every unknown presence. Now they had begun to see that not all who came were enemies. Some were helpers, teachers, and allies. The Deathworlders, initially instinct-driven and overwhelming, had demonstrated patience and adaptability. They had learned that strength alone was not always the answer, and that intelligence, observation, and careful cooperation could prevent destruction and save lives. A critical moment came when a major storm struck the city. Winds howled, buildings trembled, and some structures began to collapse. Families scrambled to safety, but the damage threatened lives. The humans and aliens responded together, moving quickly to reinforce shelters, rescue trapped citizens, and stabilize energy systems. Children watched in awe as cooperation turned fear into action. The storm passed, and while damage remained, the city had survived intact. It was a clear demonstration that survival now depended on unity, not isolation. In the aftermath, families celebrated quietly. They had endured the storm and learned to trust the humans' methods, while the humans had learned to respect the aliens' knowledge of their planet. Both sides understood that cooperation was fragile but powerful. Trust could grow when tested, and hope could survive even in a dangerous, unpredictable world. As days passed, the city continued to recover. Energy systems were restored, shelters repaired, and communication networks fully functional. Humans taught aliens new techniques for resource management, while aliens shared insights about their fragile ecology. Children explored repaired areas, practicing gestures and signals that could one day allow them to communicate with other visitors. Families worked together in small groups, building not only their homes but also their confidence in surviving future challenges. The twin moons reflected softly on the city, casting light on both alien structures and human machines. Dust lingered, but so did life. Families gathered to share stories, children played cautiously, and elders observed quietly, satisfied that the first true lessons of cooperation had been learned. The city had survived chaos, fear, and misunderstanding. It had survived the arrival of powerful outsiders, and through that survival, it had discovered a new way to endure. By the end of the cycle, the aliens had achieved something extraordinary. They had learned that survival was not only about strength or hope alone, it was about learning, adapting, and forming fragile alliances. They had learned that fear could be tempered by observation, that courage could coexist with caution, and that even the most intimidating newcomers could become partners in survival. The Deathworlders had learned equally important lessons. They had discovered that intelligence and emotional depth could exist in fragile, seemingly weak life forms. They had learned that patience, observation, and careful communication could achieve far more than instinctive dominance. They had learned that even in a universe of danger, cooperation could be the strongest form of survival. Families, children, and elders moved through the repaired city, carrying the lessons of survival forward. They remembered the fear, the chaos, and the uncertainty, but they also remembered the courage, the cooperation, and the hope that had emerged. They understood that life would never be the same, but they also understood that their future, though fragile, was possible. As the twin moons rose high, casting silver light over the city, the aliens looked to the sky. They remembered the signal they had sent into the universe, their desperate cry for help. They had not known who would answer or what would arrive. They had not known that the universe would bring both terror and salvation, but they had survived, learned, and grown. The humans, standing alongside them, watched the same moons. They had traveled across impossible distances, faced the unknown, and learned to trust in beings far different from themselves. They had discovered that survival was never just about strength. It was about understanding, patience, and courage. And as night settled over the planet, both aliens and humans understood that the universe had answered their plea in ways neither could have imagined. They had faced fear, chaos, and misunderstanding, but through courage, cooperation, and the fragile power of trust, life had endured. And though the future remained uncertain, hope, real, tangible, and human, now shone brightly across the fragile cities of the alien world.